The atmosphere inside the private estate office at Clarence House before sunrise was not merely quiet. It was surgically silent. The air held a chilling stillness, the kind that precedes a tectonic shift in history. There were no flashing cameras, no courtiers whispering in the hallways, and no advisors to soften the impending blow. King Charles III sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk, his fingers tracing the edges of a file that felt heavier than any crown he had ever worn. This was not a public ceremony or a constitutional briefing. It was a family reckoning, a private estate meeting that would effectively rewrite the financial and emotional DNA of the House of Windsor. In one devastating stroke of a fountain pen, the Sussex Trust Fund, a multi-million-dollar reservoir intended to sustain the household of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, was being liquidated and redirected. The money, the power, and the symbolic protection of the crown were shifting toward the children of Prince William. In the cold grey light of dawn, the king was not just managing an estate, he was performing an amputation to save the body of the monarchy. The Sussex Trust Fund had once been envisioned as a golden bridge, a financial umbilical cord that would keep the Duke and Duchess of Sussex tethered to the family even after their move to California. It was meant to be a safety net, a sign that despite the interviews, the memoirs, and the public wounds, Harry remained a son of the sovereign. But as Charles stared at the future safeguarding clause in the document, he no longer saw a bridge. He saw a liability. He saw a resource that could be weaponized against the institution he had spent 70 years waiting to lead. A private estate meeting is the ultimate arena of royal power, far removed from the theatre of Parliament. Here inheritance is destiny. The decision was made to move these vast resources to Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. By placing William's children at the absolute center of the royal financial structure, Charles was making a terrifyingly clear statement. The future of the monarchy has no room for uncertainty. The spare had been measured, weighed, and moved aside to ensure the heir was untouchable. Prince William sat across from his father, his expression a mask of unyielding stone. There was no sense of victory in his silence, only the heavy, aching realization of what this meant. William understood better than anyone the shadow his children walked in. George, the future king, Charlotte, the symbol of modern strength, and Louis, the innocent child the world wanted to shield. To protect them, William had to accept a decision that would effectively exile his brother. He felt the phantom pain of the fracture, the memory of a childhood spent as a duo now permanently severed into a hierarchy. Protection for his own children had arrived wrapped in the profound sorrow of a family's disintegration. Charles finally lifted the sealed estate note, reading the phrase "future safeguarding" aloud. The words were clinical, but the impact was violent. It was a verdict. It was the monarchy admitting that it no longer trusted one of its own. The first shock to the system wasn't the astronomical sum of money being moved, it was the witness list. Queen Camilla was there, her eyes fixed on her husband, sensing the exhaustion beneath his resolve. William was there, a silent sentinel for the next generation. And one senior estate advisor stood by watching the king sign the instruction without a single tremor in his hand. When those names were recorded, the decision stopped being a matter of paperwork and became a historical pivot. Charles looked at William and saw the man who would one day have to carry this same burden. This wasn't about greed or petty revenge. It was about the survival of the crown. The crown is not a collection of individuals. It is an authority that must pass untainted from one generation to the next. Their security, their education, and their public standing were no longer private concerns. They were the pillars of the state. The redirection of the trust did not happen by accident or in a moment of pique. It was the culmination of a slow, agonizing rot that had reached its breaking point during the April settlement dinner. Months earlier, at Clarence House, a dinner intended to mend fences had instead turned into a funeral for the brothers' relationship. Harry had arrived not with a desire for reconciliation, but with a demand for guarantees. He wanted written protection for his household, independent of palace control. In the language of the royals, palace control is everything. It is the rules, the limits, the oversight, and the dignity of the institution. Harry wanted the support of the crown without the constraints of the firm. Charles, listening to his younger son, felt a wound reopen. He heard a son asking for help, but he also heard a rebel asking for the keys to the armory. William had pushed back with a cold aristocratic finality, reminding Harry that the crown could not fund uncertainty, while George and his siblings carried the burden of continuity. The brothers were speaking the same language of protection, but Harry's meant freedom, while William's meant survival. When the king set down his glass that night in April, the sound echoed like a gavel. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply realized that the gap between his sons was no longer a crack. It was a canyon. The estate advisor present that night began drafting the redirection clause the very next morning. The internal record stated a brutal logic. Future support cannot become a weapon inside the family. Charles allowed silence to cover the decision for months, hoping for a sign of change. A gesture of peace, it never came. The silence only grew louder, filled with the noise of public accusations and private demands. By the time the king sat down to sign the final papers, the hope of a bridge had been replaced by the necessity of a fortress. Harry did not hear the news through a legal brief or a formal meeting. He heard it through a private, controlled palace communication. A cold, emotionless message delivered by a staff member that made the floor shift beneath his feet. The trust was gone. The money he had assumed would always be there as a birthright had been shifted to his nephews and niece. In that moment, Harry understood that this was not just about wealth, it was about status. In the royal world, money is a metric of trust. To be defunded is to be delegitimized. Meghan stood beside him, recognizing the damage instantly. She saw that this was not a technical adjustment. It was a public humiliation waiting for a headline. She pushed Harry to challenge the decision, to demand the names of those who had authorized the act of severance. But Harry hesitated. He feared the truth that sat at the end of that question, that his father had made this choice with a clear, unpressured mind. The confrontation that followed between the brothers was their first unmediated conversation in months. There were no aides, no secretaries, no publicists to filter the rage. William told Harry the decision was about the next generation, about protecting George, Charlotte, and Louis from the volatility of the family's current war. Harry heard protection, but he felt exclusion. He accused William of orchestrating the move to solidify his own power. William remained controlled, a future king already wearing the psychological armor of the throne. He didn't deny accepting the responsibility, but he made it clear the authority came from the king. The brothers reached a point of no return where every word spoken became another brick in the wall between them. Power in a monarchy is rarely loud. It is the sound of a pen touching paper, the movement of a file from an active cabinet to a restricted archive. Inside the palace, the Sussex file was moved to a restricted drawer, a place for sensitive records that are no longer part of the daily operation. It was a symbolic burial. The matter was closed. The crown had moved on. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, received the news with a quiet, somber grace. She immediately thought of George. She understood that one day her son would learn that his security was built on the wreckage of his uncle's relationship. She wanted her children shielded, not just from physical threats, but from the bitterness of this victory. She didn't want them raised on a triumph built from a family loss. She stood by William, providing the quiet strength he needed to accept a duty that felt like a betrayal of his own blood. When the news finally broke to the public, it was not as a subtle adjustment, but as a verdict. Outside Buckingham Palace, the rain fell on a divided public. For some, it was a necessary act of a king protecting the future. For others, it was the final act of a father abandoning a son. The country split into emotional camps, each side defending a different version of justice. But inside the palace walls, the argument was over. Charles had made the choice. William had accepted the burden. Harry had felt the loss. The crown, cold and enduring, had stepped forward into a future that looked stronger from the outside, but felt infinitely lonelier from within. Charles carried the sorrow of that signature long after the ink had dried. He had spent his life trying to be a bridge between the old world and the new, between his mother's tradition and his own modern vision. He had hoped to keep his family whole. But the April settlement dinner had proved that love alone was not a strong enough foundation for a monarchy in crisis. He had to choose between being a father and being a king. By signing that estate note, he chose the king. He chose the line of succession. He chose the 3 children who would one day stand where he stands now. The redirection of the trust fund was the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. It told the world that the monarchy had stopped planning for Harry's return and had started planning for his absence. The future safeguarding of George, Charlotte, and Louis is now a matter of record. Their path is secured, their education funded, and their role in the dynasty cemented. But the cost of that security is a wound that may never heal. The king's decision was a surgical strike designed to protect the institution from further conflict. But it left the family's heart in pieces. As William entered Windsor that morning, his expression fixed and royal, he looked like a man who had finally realized that the crown is a crown of thorns. He was no longer just a brother, he was the protector of the next era. And Harry, standing on the other side of the world, realized that the gates of the palace hadn't just been locked, they had been moved. In the final analysis, the Sussex Trust was never about the money. It was about belief. Charles believed that for the monarchy to survive, it had to be a fortress of stability. Harry believed it should be a family of compassion. William believed it was a duty that transcended personal desire. These 3 beliefs could no longer coexist in the same room. The king's signature was the final word. The monarchy chose continuity over reconciliation. It chose the children over the conflict. It was a cold, clear, and devastating verdict. The fire that had burned through the family for years had finally been contained, but the landscape it left behind was unrecognizable. The crown survives as it always does, but it does so by shedding the parts of itself that are too wounded to carry. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the silent, high-stakes world of royal estate planning. If you found this analysis of the king's decision and the future of the Wales children compelling, don't forget to subscribe. We continue to unmask the secrets, the dramas, and the psychological wars that define the most famous family on earth. What do you think of King Charles's final verdict? Was it a necessary act of protection for Prince George, or a heartbreaking rejection of Prince Harry? Does the crown's survival justify the loss of a family's bond? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We are witnessing the real-time reshaping of a dynasty, and your perspective is part of that history. Until next time, stay tuned as we peel back more layers of the golden illusion and explore the truth behind the glamour. The stories of the stars and the sovereigns never truly end. They just wait for the next chapter to be written. Goodbye for now, but the conversation has just begun. The lights of London continue to shine on the palaces, but the shadows within them have grown longer. The April settlement dinner, the act of severance, and the redirection of the Sussex Trust are now part of the hidden architecture of the monarchy. They are the secrets that William and Harry will carry for the rest of their lives. The children George, Charlotte, and Louis will grow up in the safety that was bought for them at such a high price. They will represent the resilience of the crown, unaware of the trembling hand that signed their future into existence. For in the world of kings and princes, the greatest performances are often the ones played out in silence behind closed doors before the sun even rises. The history of the House of Windsor is a history of such choices where the blood of the family is always secondary to the gold of the crown. And as Charles looks out over the gardens of Highgrove or the lawns of Windsor, he knows he has done his duty. He has secured the line. He has saved the future. But at night, in the quiet of his study, he must also know that he has lost a son. And that is a price that no trust fund, no matter how vast, can ever truly cover. The swallow has flown, the bridge has fallen, and the crown remains solitary, silent, and supreme.